12-year-old Ibrahim sat in the back corner of the classroom, right next to the window with the broken latch. He liked that spot, not because of the view or the fresh air that came through the gap, but because it meant fewer people would look at him. When you sit in the back corner, you become part of the furniture, just another desk, another chair, another face that teachers scan past when they're looking for someone to answer a question. It was a Tuesday morning, and the classroom was filling up with the usual noise. Kids were laughing about something that happened during the cricket match yesterday. A group of girls near the front were sharing snacks their mothers had packed. Two boys were arguing about whose turn it was to clean the board. Normal things, the kind of everyday chaos that happens in every school, in every city, in every country. Ibrahim opened his notebook slowly. The cover was held together with tape, and some of the pages in the middle were loose. He'd been using the same notebook for 3 months now, writing smaller and smaller to make the pages last longer. The other kids got new notebooks whenever they needed them, but Ibrahim had to wait until the monthly supplies came to the orphanage. And even then, there were 32 children to provide for, so you learned to make things last. He flipped to a blank page and started doodling in the margins. Small things, nothing special. A bird, a tree, a house with smoke coming from the chimney. The kind of house he saw in storybooks. The kind with a family sitting around a dinner table, warm light glowing through the windows. He'd never lived in a house like that. At least not that he could remember. Mrs. Aslam walked into the classroom and the noise level dropped by half. She had that effect on people. Not because she was strict or scary, but because she had this way of looking at you that made you want to do better. She taught English, and unlike some of the other teachers who just read from the textbook and gave homework, she actually seemed to care whether you understood what she was teaching. Ibrahim watched her as she set her bag down on the desk and pulled out a stack of papers. Their essays from last week? His stomach tightened a little. He'd worked hard on that essay, spent 2 whole evenings writing and rewriting it by the dim light in the study room at Hope House. The orphanage had one study room with 4 tables and a single tube light that flickered. When the voltage was low, kids took turns using it, and Ibrahim had waited until 9 o'clock for his turn, even though his eyes were already tired. Mrs. Aslam started handing back the essays. Ibrahim heard other kids reacting to their grades. Some groaned, some smiled, some immediately started comparing marks with their neighbors. When she reached his desk, she didn't just place the paper down like she did with the others. She paused for a second, met his eyes, and gave him a small nod. He looked down at his paper. There was a red mark at the top, circled, 87 out of 100, and below it, in her neat handwriting, "Beautiful imagery, Ibrahim. You have a gift with words." Something warm spread through his chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. He'd gotten compliments on his writing before, but they usually felt automatic, like something teachers said to be nice. This felt different. This felt like she'd actually read what he wrote and saw something in it, saw something in him. The bell rang for break time and the classroom emptied in seconds. Kids rushed toward the canteen or the playground, their voices echoing down the hallway. Ibrahim stayed in his seat. He always did. Break time was complicated when you didn't have money for snacks, and when the groups of friends had already formed years ago, built on birthday parties and weekend play dates and shared family stories. He'd learned it was easier to just stay inside, finish homework, or read whatever book was available in the classroom shelf. Mrs. Aslam was organizing papers at her desk. She looked up and saw him still sitting there. "Ibrahim, don't you want to go outside?" "It's a nice day," he shrugged. "I'm okay here, miss." She studied him for a moment, and he wondered if she could see right through him. If she knew that "I'm okay here" really meant "I don't know where else to go." But she didn't push. She just nodded and went back to her papers. Ibrahim pulled out a book from his bag. It was from the orphanage library, a small collection of donated books that Sister Ruth kept in a cupboard in the main office. This one was about a boy who went on adventures, who had friends and a home to return to after each journey. Ibrahim liked stories like that. They showed him worlds that felt possible, even if they weren't his reality yet. He'd been living at Hope House Orphanage since he was 4 years old. 8 years now. Long enough that the memories of before had faded to just feelings, not actual pictures in his mind. He remembered warmth. He remembered a woman's voice singing. He remembered the smell of food cooking and feeling safe. But he couldn't remember faces anymore. Couldn't remember what his mother looked like or the sound of his father's laugh. A distant aunt had brought him to the orphanage after the accident. That's what everyone called it. The accident, as if calling it that made it easier to understand, easier to accept. His parents had died in a car crash on a rainy night. And suddenly Ibrahim went from being someone's whole world to being one of 32 children in a 3-story building with chipping paint and a water tank that made strange noises. Hope House wasn't a bad place. The staff did their best with limited resources. There were rules and schedules and shared responsibilities. Everyone had chores. Everyone went to school. Everyone got 3 meals a day and clean clothes and a bed to sleep in. On paper, it looked like enough. And maybe it was enough for survival. But there's a difference between surviving and actually living, between being taken care of and being loved. Mr. Hamid, who managed the orphanage, was a kind man with tired eyes. He knew all the children's names and tried to ask about their day when he saw them. Sister Ruth, who ran the daily operations, was efficient and fair. She made sure things ran smoothly, that fights were resolved, that sick kids got medicine. But with 32 children, there was only so much individual attention to go around. Love, real love, the kind that makes you feel like you matter just because you exist, that was rare. That was a luxury. Ibrahim had learned to be quiet. Quiet kids didn't cause problems. Quiet kids didn't draw attention when attention might mean criticism. Quiet kids could observe and understand the world without having to explain themselves. So he sat in back corners, ate lunch under the neem tree in the courtyard by himself, and found company in books and the words he wrote in his taped-together notebook. The classroom was peaceful during break time. Just the distant sounds of children playing, the traffic from the street outside, and the scratch of Mrs. Aslam's pen as she worked. Ibrahim turned the page of his book and lost himself in someone else's story, because that was easier than thinking too much about his own. When the bell rang and the other kids came flooding back in, smelling like fresh air and laughter, Ibrahim closed his book and put it away. He straightened in his chair and prepared for the next lesson. Just another ordinary day in the back corner of the classroom. Just another quiet boy that most people looked past. But Mrs. Aslam's note was still there at the top of his essay. You have a gift with words. He read it one more time before tucking the paper into his notebook. Maybe she was right. Maybe words could be his gift. And maybe somehow that would be enough. Thursday morning started like most days. Ibrahim woke up at 6 when the alarm bell rang through the dormitory. 6 boys shared his room, their beds arranged in neat rows against the walls. He dressed quickly in his school uniform, the same one he washed every other night and hung to dry by the window. The shirt was getting tight across his shoulders, but new uniforms were ordered only twice a year, so he'd have to make it work for another 3 months. After morning assembly and a breakfast of paratha and chai, the children from Hope House walked together to school. It was a 20-minute walk, and Ibrahim usually stayed toward the back of the group, listening to the others talk about homework and teachers and the latest movie playing at the cinema. He didn't contribute much to these conversations. What was the point? He couldn't go to the cinema. He didn't have pocket money for snacks after school. He lived in a different world than most of them, even though they walked the same streets. English class was third period. Ibrahim actually looked forward to it, which was more than he could say for mathematics or social studies. Mrs. Aslam made literature feel alive. When she read poetry, it was like she was letting you peek into someone's soul. When she explained stories, she talked about characters like they were real people with real problems, not just words on a page. Today, she walked in with an energy that suggested something different was coming. She wrote on the board in large letters, "Gratitude essay due Monday." "All right, class," she said, turning to face them with a smile. "This week, I want you to write about someone you're grateful for. It can be anyone. A family member, a friend, a neighbor. Anyone who has made a positive impact on your life. I want you to think deeply about why you're grateful for this person and what they've taught you." The classroom immediately filled with murmurs and excited chatter. Ibrahim heard the girl in front of him lean over to her friend. "I'm writing about my mother. She makes the best biryani and she always knows when I'm sad." A boy across the aisle said, "I'm doing mine about my grandfather. He taught me how to fly a kite and tells the funniest stories." Another kid near the window, "My dad. He works so hard for us and he still finds time to help me with homework every night." Mrs. Aslam smiled at the enthusiasm. "Good. I want real emotions in these essays." Don't just tell me facts. Make me feel why this person is important to you. Show me through stories and examples. Minimum 500 words, and remember, quality over quantity. Ibrahim stared at the words on the board. Someone you're grateful for. His pencil felt heavy in his hand. He opened his notebook to a fresh page, wrote his name and the date at the top, and then nothing. The blank space below seemed to grow larger, mocking him. Around him, other kids were already making notes, planning their essays, some even starting to write. The energy in the room was positive, excited, but Ibrahim felt like he was sinking. His throat tightened and he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. Don't let anyone see. Don't let anyone know that this simple assignment felt like being asked to describe colors you'd never seen. Who was he grateful for? Mr. Hamid? He was kind, sure. He ran the orphanage with good intentions. But Mr. Hamid was responsible for 32 children. Ibrahim was just one face among many, one name on a long list. When Mr. Hamid asked, "How are you?" in the hallway, he was already moving past before Ibrahim could answer. Not because he was cruel, but because there were always 5 other things demanding his attention. Sister Ruth? She kept everything running smoothly. She made sure everyone had what they needed, but Sister Ruth's kindness was practical, not personal. She cared about the group, not the individual. Ibrahim couldn't remember a single time she'd asked him about his dreams or his fears or the things that kept him awake at night. His aunt who'd brought him to the orphanage? He barely remembered her. She'd visited once, maybe twice in 8 years. She'd done her duty by making sure he had a place to stay, but she'd never tried to be family. His friends? Ibrahim's throat tightened more. Did he even have friends? There were kids he sat near at dinner, kids he walked to school with, but friends? Real friends? The kind you could write a 500-word essay about. The kind who knew your secrets and your dreams and still chose to be in your life. The problem wasn't that there was no one kind in his life. The problem was that kindness and gratitude felt different when you were measuring them against what everyone else had. How could he write about being grateful for basic necessities when the kid next to him was writing about family vacations and birthday surprises and parents who showed up to every school event? Ibrahim looked around the classroom. He saw kids writing with ease, some already a paragraph in. They had abundance, not just of things, but of people who cared. They were writing about mothers who packed extra snacks in their lunchboxes, fathers who attended parent-teacher meetings, grandparents who spoiled them with sweets. They were writing about family dinners and inside jokes and feeling chosen, wanted, essential to someone's happiness. And what did Ibrahim have? A bed in a room with 5 other boys, meals made for 32 people at once, a schedule that kept him busy but not fulfilled, adults who made sure he didn't fall through the cracks but who didn't really know him, not the real him, not the part of him that wondered late at night if anyone would notice if he disappeared. He felt guilty for even thinking these thoughts. He should be grateful. He had more than many orphans in the world. He had education, shelter, food, safety. Some children didn't even have that. But knowing you should be grateful and actually feeling it are 2 different things. And right now, staring at that blank page, Ibrahim just felt empty. The bell rang for break and kids started packing up their things. Ibrahim stayed in his seat, still staring at his mostly empty notebook. He'd managed to write the title, "Someone I'm Grateful For," but nothing else. The words wouldn't come, or maybe they wouldn't come because he didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound bitter, that wouldn't reveal the loneliness he tried so hard to hide. Ibrahim, he looked up. Mrs. Aslam was standing near his desk, her bag over her shoulder. Most of the students had already left for break. "You okay? You look a bit troubled." He nodded quickly. "Yes, miss. Just thinking about the assignment." She studied him for a moment, and Ibrahim had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see more than he wanted her to. "Take your time with it. Sometimes the best writing comes when we really sit with the question." She left, and Ibrahim was alone again. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the playground where kids were playing cricket and sharing snacks and living their uncomplicated lives. He felt separate from all of it, like he was watching a movie of other people's happiness. That night at Hope House, after dinner and chores and the mandatory study hour, Ibrahim lay in his bunk bed and stared at the ceiling. The other boys in his room were already asleep, their breathing steady in the darkness. He thought about the assignment, thought about all the things he could write but wouldn't, about how being an orphan meant learning to be grateful for crumbs while watching others feast, about how every small kindness felt both precious and painful because it reminded you of all the kindness that wasn't there. He thought about Mrs. Aslam's comment on his last essay. You have a gift with words. Maybe that was true. But right now his gift felt more like a curse because he had all these feelings and no safe way to express them. If he wrote honestly about what it felt like to have no one to be deeply grateful for, would she think he was ungrateful? Would she pity him? Would she show it to the principal or to Sister Ruth? The fear of being seen, really seen, was almost worse than the loneliness itself. Friday morning came, and Ibrahim still hadn't written anything. He sat through classes in a fog, his mind circling the same problem over and over. During English class, Mrs. Aslam asked if anyone wanted to share their progress. Hands shot up around the room. Kids read paragraphs about their grandmother's wisdom, their father's strength, their mother's unconditional love. Each story was a small knife, not because the stories were bad, but because they highlighted everything Ibrahim didn't have. He kept his head down, pretending to take notes, but really, he was just drawing circles in the margins of his notebook, over and over until the paper nearly tore. When the bell rang, Mrs. Aslam called out, "Don't forget, essays are due Monday. I'm excited to read them all." The weekend at Hope House was the same as every weekend. Chores in the morning, free time in the afternoon if you'd finished your work, and mandatory quiet time in the evening. Ibrahim sat under the neem tree in the courtyard on Saturday afternoon, his notebook open in front of him, that same blank page staring back at him. He watched some of the younger kids playing, their laughter bright and innocent. They didn't understand yet that they were different, that their lives had taken a turn that set them apart from the mainstream world. Maybe that was a blessing. The younger you were, the easier it was to accept your circumstances without constantly comparing them to what could have been. Sunday evening came, and panic started to creep in. The essay was due tomorrow. He had nothing. He couldn't turn in a blank page, but he also couldn't write something fake, something cheerful and grateful that didn't reflect how complicated his feelings actually were. He sat in the study room that night, his pencil hovering over the paper, and for the first time in years, he felt tears pressing against his eyes. Not dramatic sobbing tears, just the quiet kind that come when you're tired of pretending everything is fine. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Ibrahim walked to school with a knot in his stomach that tightened with every step. His notebook, still containing that blank page with just the title written at the top, felt heavier than usual in his bag. He'd stayed up until almost midnight on Sunday, staring at the paper, willing the words to come. But every time he tried to write something, it felt dishonest. And if he couldn't be honest, what was the point? The other kids from Hope House chatted as they walked, but Ibrahim barely heard them. His mind was racing through possibilities. Maybe he could claim he'd forgotten the assignment at the orphanage. Maybe he could say he was sick. Maybe he could just face the consequences and accept whatever punishment came with not turning in his work. He'd never missed an assignment before, never been the kind of student who made excuses. But this felt different. This felt impossible. English class was after lunch. Ibrahim sat through his morning classes like a ghost, present but not really there. During lunch break, he stayed in the classroom again, but this time it wasn't a choice. He was hiding from the moment when he'd have to face Mrs. Aslam and admit he hadn't done the work. The bell rang, announcing the start of afternoon classes. Students filed back into the classroom, still buzzing with post-lunch energy. Mrs. Aslam walked in with her usual calm presence, carrying a folder that Ibrahim assumed was for collecting their essays. "Good afternoon, class," she said warmly. "I hope everyone had a good weekend. Let's start by collecting your gratitude essays. Please pass them forward." The sound of papers rustling filled the room. Ibrahim's hands felt cold. He watched as essays moved from desk to desk, making their way toward the front of each row. When it was his turn to pass his paper forward, he had nothing to give. The girl in front of him turned around expectantly, then looked confused when Ibrahim just shook his head slightly. Mrs. Aslam collected the stacks from each row, doing a quick count. Her eyes scanned the classroom, and Ibrahim knew the moment she realized someone was missing. Their eyes met across the room, and he saw something in her expression. Not anger, not disappointment. Something gentler. Concern, maybe. She didn't call him out in front of the class. Instead, she set the essays on her desk and began the day's lesson on poetry. Ibrahim tried to focus, but the words blurred together. He kept expecting her to pull him aside to ask where his essay was, to demand an explanation. But the class ended without any confrontation. As students started packing up their bags, Mrs. Aslam's voice rose above the chatter. "Ibrahim, could you stay back for a few minutes, please?" The classroom emptied quickly. Soon it was just the two of them. Ibrahim stood by his desk, unsure whether to approach her or wait. His heart was beating faster than it should. He wasn't afraid of punishment. He was afraid of something worse. Being seen, being understood, being pitied. Mrs. Aslam didn't sit behind her desk in that formal teacher position. Instead, she pulled a chair up next to his and sat down, putting them at eye level. It was a small gesture, but it changed everything. She wasn't looking down at him. She was looking with him. "Ibrahim," she said gently, "I noticed you didn't turn in your essay. That's not like you. You're usually one of my most reliable students." He stared at his hands. "I know, miss. I'm sorry. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm just wondering if everything is okay. Was the assignment unclear? Did you run out of time?" He could have lied. He could have blamed it on being busy with chores at the orphanage or not feeling well or any number of easy excuses. But something about the way she was sitting there, patient and genuinely concerned, made him want to tell the truth. Or at least part of it. "The assignment was clear," he said quietly. I couldn't write it. Couldn't or didn't want to." He thought about that distinction. "Couldn't, I tried. I sat with my notebook for hours. But the words wouldn't come." Mrs. Aslam nodded slowly. She didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't immediately try to fix the problem. She just let his words settle in the space between them. "Can I ask why it was difficult?" Her voice was soft, not pushing, just inviting. Ibrahim's throat felt tight. This was the moment. He could keep his walls up, keep pretending everything was fine, keep being the quiet boy in the back corner who didn't cause problems, or he could risk being honest. It's hard to write about being grateful for someone when... He paused, choosing his words carefully. When you see everyone else writing about their families, about people who love them just because they exist, about belonging somewhere. Mrs. Aslam was quiet, but her eyes never left his face. She was really listening, not the kind of listening adults do while thinking about what they're going to say next. Real listening. The words started coming faster now, like a dam had cracked. "I live at Hope House Orphanage. Have been there since I was 4, and it's not a bad place, miss. Really, it's not. Mr. Hamid is kind, and Sister Ruth makes sure we have what we need. But when you ask me to write about someone I'm grateful for, someone who's made an impact on my life..." He gestured helplessly. "I watched the other kids writing about their mothers and fathers and grandparents, writing about people who chose them, who want them, who know them. And I just felt empty," she suggested gently. He nodded, surprised she understood. "Not empty like there's no kindness in my life. Just empty like there's no one who knows me, really knows me. I'm just one of 32 kids at the orphanage. One more student in your class. One more face in the crowd. How do you write 500 words about that?" Mrs. Aslam was quiet for a long moment. Ibrahim risked a glance at her face and was surprised to see that her eyes were shining with what might have been tears, though she blinked them away quickly. "I'm so sorry, Ibrahim," she said. "I didn't think about how that assignment might feel for someone in your situation. It's not your fault, miss. You didn't know. But I should have been more thoughtful." She shook her head. "You're right that it's different. And I imagine it must be exhausting sometimes, watching everyone else have what you don't." The fact that she acknowledged it, that she didn't try to minimize his feelings or tell him he should just be grateful for what he had, made something loosen in Ibrahim's chest. He'd expected her to be disappointed or to give him a speech about perspective and gratitude. Instead, she was validating him, seeing him, really seeing him. "Can I tell you something?" Mrs. Aslam said. "And I want you to really hear this." He nodded. Gratitude isn't about comparing your life to everyone else's. It's not a competition. It's not about having the most or the best. Real gratitude is about noticing the small lights in your own darkness, even if they seem tiny compared to someone else's bonfire. Ibrahim absorbed her words. "Small lights in your own darkness." She continued. "You don't have to write about some big obvious person who gives you everything. Maybe your gratitude is for smaller things. The teacher who helped you understand fractions. The friend who shared lunch once. A book that made you feel less alone. Even just the fact that you've survived and you're still here. Still trying. That's worth something." "But the assignment said to write about a person," Ibrahim said. Then write about a person who gave you one of those small lights, even if they don't know they did. Even if it seems small compared to what others have. Your truth is valid, Ibrahim. Your experience matters. You don't have to pretend to have what you don't. Something shifted inside him. It was like she'd given him permission to be honest, to write from his actual life instead of trying to manufacture feelings he didn't have. What if, she said thoughtfully, you write about whatever small light you've found, whatever person, even if your connection to them isn't deep or permanent. Write about what they gave you, even if it was just a moment. That's real. That's honest. And honestly, that might be more powerful than any of the other essays I receive. Ibrahim thought about her words. Small lights. He thought about his life at the orphanage, his days at school, the small moments that had mattered even though they seemed insignificant compared to the big, obvious love other kids had. And then he thought about Mrs. Aslam herself. The way she'd written "You have a gift with words" on his essay. The way she'd noticed when he sat alone. The way she'd stayed after class more than once to explain something to him when he was struggling. The way she was sitting here right now, not rushing him, not judging him, just being present. Miss, he said quietly. Yes? Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember last month when you helped me with those grammar exercises after school? And you gave me half of your sandwich because you said you'd made too much lunch? She smiled. I remember. Did you really make too much? Or were you just being kind? Her smile widened, and there was something in her eyes that acknowledged his understanding. Does it matter? No, he said. It just mattered that you did it. That you saw I was hungry and you helped without making me feel bad about it. Mrs. Aslam's expression softened even more. You're very observant, Ibrahim. I think that's what happens when you're quiet. You notice things. That's a gift too, she said. The ability to notice, to observe, to see what others miss. Don't underestimate that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The afternoon light was coming through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the desks. Outside, Ibrahim could hear other students in different classrooms, the normal sounds of school continuing around them. Miss? He said again. Yes, Ibrahim. Thank you for this. For listening. For not making me feel bad about not doing the assignment. You don't have to thank me for basic kindness, she said. But you're welcome. She stood up and Ibrahim stood too. I'll give you until Friday to turn in the essay. Does that work? No penalty, no questions asked. Just write something honest. Whatever feels true to you. Okay, he said. I will. As he walked toward the door, she called out to him one more time. Ibrahim? You asked what you can write about. But I think you already know. Sometimes the people who change our lives are the ones who show us, even in small ways, that we matter. Think about who's done that for you. Even once. Even briefly. He nodded and left the classroom. As he walked down the hallway toward his next class, his mind was already turning over the conversation. She hadn't solved all his problems. She hadn't magically given him a family or changed his circumstances, but she'd done something else. She'd seen him. She'd validated his feelings. She'd given him permission to be honest instead of grateful in the way everyone expected. And in doing so, she'd become exactly the person he could write about. Monday afternoon felt different after Ibrahim's conversation with Mrs. Aslam. He walked through the rest of his classes, with something new stirring in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close. A sense of possibility. Like maybe he could write this assignment after all. Not by pretending or by trying to sound like the other students, but by being honest about his own experience, his own small lights. That evening at Hope House, after dinner and evening assembly, Ibrahim went to the study room. It was his turn to use one of the tables, and for once he was actually looking forward to it. He opened his notebook to a fresh page. Not the one with just the title that had been mocking him all weekend. A completely new page. A new start. He sat there for a few minutes just thinking, remembering. The conversation with Mrs. Aslam had unlocked something in him. She'd told him that gratitude doesn't have to be about big, obvious things. It can be about the small moments, the small acts, the times when someone saw you and chose to be kind, even when they didn't have to. And then Ibrahim realized something. He'd been so focused on what he didn't have that he'd stopped noticing what he did have. Mrs. Aslam wasn't his mother. She wasn't family. She wouldn't be at his future graduation or wedding. She was just his English teacher. But in the past few months, she'd been more than that. She'd been someone who noticed him. He started making a list in his mind. All the small things. The way she'd complimented his writing. The way she'd shared her lunch. The way she'd helped him with grammar after school without making it feel like charity. The way she'd listened today without judgment. The way she'd sat beside him instead of behind her desk. The way she'd validated his feelings instead of telling him he should just be grateful for what he had. And suddenly, Ibrahim knew what he wanted to write. Not an essay. He couldn't write an essay about this. Essays were structured and formal, and what he was feeling was too raw for that. Too honest. Too real. He wanted to write a poem. Ibrahim had never written a poem before. Not a real one. He'd done the assignments in class when Mrs. Aslam taught them about rhyme schemes and meter. But those were just exercises. This would be different. This would be something from his heart. He started writing. The first few lines came slowly, carefully. He crossed out words, rewrote phrases, tried to find the right way to say what he was feeling. But then after a few minutes, something clicked. The words started flowing more naturally. It was like his conversation with Mrs. Aslam had opened a door, and now everything he'd been holding back could finally come out. He wrote about feeling invisible, about sitting in the back corner of the classroom and being just another face. He wrote about watching other kids with their families and feeling separate from that world. But then he wrote about the small moments that had mattered. The comment on his essay, the sandwich, the patience, the listening, the way Mrs. Aslam had shown him in small but important ways that he was worth noticing. The tube light in the study room flickered slightly as the voltage dipped. One of the younger kids came in to use another table, and the sound of their chair scraping against the floor barely registered with Ibrahim. He was lost in his writing now, pouring out feelings he hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. He wrote about how kindness doesn't have to be grand to be meaningful, how sometimes the smallest gestures carry the most weight when you're used to being overlooked. He wrote about learning that being chosen isn't what determines your worth, that you can matter even if you're not someone's first priority, even if you're not permanent in their life. By the time he finished, his hand was cramping and his eyes were tired. The poem was 12 lines long, not very long compared to the 500-word essay that was assigned. But every word felt true. Every line felt necessary. He read it over several times, making small adjustments, changing a word here or there to make the meaning clearer. And then, satisfied that it said what he needed it to say, he carefully tore the page out of his notebook. He folded it in half, then in half again, and tucked it into his textbook. That night, lying in his bunk bed while the other boys slept, Ibrahim felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from being honest, from acknowledging your truth instead of hiding it. He'd written something real, something vulnerable. And whether Mrs. Aslam liked it or not, whether she understood it or not, he'd been brave enough to try. The next morning was Tuesday. Ibrahim went through his usual routine, but there was a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before. He walked to school with the other kids from Hope House, and when they asked him about his weekend, he actually joined the conversation instead of staying silent. English class wasn't until Thursday. Ibrahim thought about waiting until then to give Mrs. Aslam the poem, but something made him want to do it sooner. During morning break, while the other kids went to the playground, he walked to the staff room. His heart was beating fast and he almost turned back 3 times. But he pushed himself forward. Mrs. Aslam was at her desk eating an apple and marking papers. She looked up when Ibrahim appeared at the door. "Ibrahim, come in. Is everything all right?" "Yes, miss." He walked toward her desk, the folded paper suddenly feeling heavy in his hand. "I wrote the assignment. I know you said I had until Friday, but I finished it and I wanted to give it to you now." Her face brightened. "That's wonderful. I'm so glad you were able to write something." He handed her the folded paper. "It's not an essay, though." "I hope that's okay. I tried to write an essay, but it didn't feel right. So I wrote something else." She unfolded the paper carefully, her eyes already scanning the first few lines. "A poem," she said softly. "How lovely." Ibrahim stood there awkwardly, suddenly regretting his decision to hand it to her in person. What if she read it right now? What if she saw him watching her read it? That felt too vulnerable, too exposed. "I should go," he said quickly. "I just wanted to turn it in." "Wait, Ibrahim." She looked up from the paper. "Thank you for this. And thank you for being brave enough to write honestly. I can already tell this is special. You haven't even read it yet. I don't need to read all of it to know it's special. The fact that you wrote it at all, that you were willing to be vulnerable, that's what makes it special." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. If he tried to say anything, he might start crying, and that would be embarrassing. "Go enjoy the rest of your break," Mrs. Aslam said gently. "And Ibrahim, I'll see you in class on Thursday." He left the staff room and walked toward his favorite spot under the neem tree in the courtyard. He sat down, leaning against the trunk, and closed his eyes. It was done. He'd written the assignment. He'd been honest. And whatever happened next, at least he'd tried. Thursday morning arrived. Ibrahim walked into English class with his stomach doing nervous flips. He didn't know if Mrs. Aslam would mention his poem in front of everyone or keep it private. He didn't know if she'd liked it or thought it was strange. He didn't know anything, and the not knowing was almost worse than anything else. Mrs. Aslam started the class normally, teaching them about metaphors and giving them examples from famous poetry. Ibrahim tried to focus, but his mind kept wandering to that folded paper he'd given her, wondering what she'd thought, whether he'd made a mistake by being so honest. The class ended without any mention of the assignment. Students started packing up their bags, heading to their next classes. Ibrahim was putting his notebook away when Mrs. Aslam's voice called out, "Ibrahim, could you stay for just a moment?"
Here it was.
His heart rate picked up as the classroom emptied. When they were alone, Mrs. Aslam walked over to his desk. She was holding the folded paper, and Ibrahim noticed that the edges looked worn, like she'd opened and closed it multiple times. "I read your poem," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I read it several times, actually." Ibrahim couldn't read her expression. "Was it okay? I know it wasn't the essay you asked for." "Ibrahim, it was more than okay." She paused, and he was shocked to see her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "It was one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever given me." He didn't know what to say to that. Beautiful? He'd just written down his honest feelings. There was nothing fancy about it, no complex metaphors or impressive vocabulary. "You wrote about me," she said softly. "Yes, miss. You said to write about someone who gave me a small light. You did that. You probably don't even realize it, but you did." Mrs. Aslam pressed her lips together, clearly trying to control her emotions. "May I keep this?" "The original?" "Of course. It's yours. I want you to know something, Ibrahim. I've been teaching for 15 years. I've received countless assignments and essays. Some of them were well-written, some were creative, some were thorough. But this?" She held up the folded paper. "This is the first time a student has made me understand why I became a teacher. You reminded me that the small things matter, that noticing someone, really seeing them, can change their whole day, maybe even their whole life." Ibrahim felt his throat tighten. He'd written the poem for her, yes, but also for himself. He'd needed to acknowledge those small lights, to name them, to recognize that even in his difficult circumstances, there were moments of kindness that mattered. "I wrote at the bottom," Mrs. Aslam said, showing him the paper. "I hope you don't mind." Ibrahim looked at what she'd written in her neat handwriting. "Ibrahim, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. You are seen. You are valued. You matter." He couldn't stop the tears that came to his eyes then. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or just the overwhelming feeling of being acknowledged, really acknowledged by someone who didn't have to care, but chose to anyway. "I'm going to keep this in my desk," Mrs. Aslam said. "And whenever I'm having a hard day, whenever I'm wondering if teaching makes a difference, I'm going to read it. You've given me a gift, Ibrahim, a reminder that small acts of kindness matter more than we realize." They stood there for a moment in silence, teacher and student, two people who'd unexpectedly become important to each other, not in a big dramatic way, not in the way movies show, but in the quiet, real way that actually changes lives. After that Thursday, something shifted in Ibrahim's world. Not everything changed. He still lived at Hope House. He still wore the same tight school uniform and walked to school every morning. From the outside, his life looked exactly the same, but inside, something was different. He'd taken a risk by being vulnerable, by writing that poem, by admitting that he needed kindness, and instead of being judged or pitied, he'd been seen, really seen, and that made all the difference. Mrs. Aslam didn't treat him differently in class. She didn't give him special attention or make a big deal about the poem, but there were small moments. A knowing smile when their eyes met. a gentle hand on his shoulder when she walked past his desk, a comment on his work that showed she was paying attention, and Ibrahim found himself participating more in class, raising his hand to answer questions, sharing his thoughts during discussions. The back corner was still his seat, but he no longer felt invisible there. He'd learned that being quiet and being invisible were two different things. You could be quiet and still matter. At Hope House, Ibrahim began looking at his life differently. He still noticed the things he didn't have, but he also started noticing the things he did have. The way Mr. Hamid always asked about his day. The way Sister Ruth made sure his favorite vegetables were included in dinner sometimes. These weren't grand gestures of love, but they were real. They were evidence that people cared. Years passed. Ibrahim moved through school, then university. When he turned 16, he aged out of Hope House. The orphanage helped him find a small room and connected him with programs for young adults. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mrs. Aslam had moved to a different school by then, but they stayed in touch. She'd given him her email address and told him to write whenever he needed someone to talk to. He did. And she always wrote back, sometimes with advice, sometimes with encouragement, sometimes just with the reminder that she remembered him, that he'd mattered to her, that he still did. Ibrahim finished school and got into a social work program. He'd thought a lot about what he wanted to do with his life. He kept coming back to one idea. He wanted to work with children like himself. Children who'd lost their families or never had them. Children who needed someone to see them, the way Mrs. Aslam had seen him. After graduating, Ibrahim got a job at a children's home. His role was to be a counselor, someone the kids could talk to. And because he'd lived it himself, he understood in a way that other social workers couldn't. He knew what it felt like to watch other kids being chosen while you remained unchosen. He knew what it felt like to need kindness so desperately that even small gestures felt enormous. And so Ibrahim made it his mission to notice the quiet kids. The ones in the back corners. He made sure they knew they were seen. He asked about their interests. He complimented their work. He shared his lunch. He did all the small things that had mattered so much when he was on the receiving end. Ibrahim kept a copy of the poem he'd written all those years ago folded in his wallet. Whenever he had a hard day at work, whenever he felt like he wasn't making a difference, he'd take out that poem and read it. It reminded him that small acts of kindness mattered. That being seen by even one person can change everything. The orphan boy who wrote his teacher a poem had grown into a man who dedicated his life to being someone else's small light in the darkness. He'd learned that you don't have to have everything to be grateful. You don't have to have the perfect life to find meaning. Sometimes one person seeing you is enough. Sometimes one act of kindness is the beginning of everything. Sometimes pain can be transformed into purpose. Ibrahim's story didn't have a fairy tale ending. He didn't get adopted into a perfect family. His past didn't erase itself just because he'd found purpose, but he had something perhaps more valuable. He had learned that love comes in many forms, that family can be found in unexpected places, that being chosen isn't what determines your worth, that small kindnesses matter more than we realize. And in the end, isn't that what we all need? Not perfection, not abundance, just someone who sees us, someone who acknowledges our struggle, someone who shows us that we're worth noticing. The poem folded in Ibrahim's wallet wasn't just paper with words. It was evidence that connection matters, that kindness ripples, that being seen changes lives. Some people are born into abundance. Others have to find it in fragments, piece by piece, moment by moment. Both paths are valid. But the second path teaches you something special. It teaches you that every small kindness is a miracle, that being noticed is a gift, that mattering to even one person is enough to build a life on. The orphan boy who wrote his teacher a poem learned all of this, and then he spent the rest of his life passing it forward, one small light at a time.